Okay. Welcome. Good morning. Thank you for showing up bright and early on Thursday morning to listen to us talk. First, we're going to go through some housekeeping items. Make sure you turn off your cell phones and set them to vibrate, so we don't have any interruptions. Just as a reminder, please complete the session evaluations in the mobile app. We'd love to hear your feedback. For CEU information, there's some information in the back of the room, or you can get some assistance in N220E if you have any questions. Hopefully all your badges were scanned before you entered the room, but if not, make sure your badges were scanned to confirm attendance for the CEU and attendance certificates. And then it says to visit the Coverings Lounge, booth 3919 for educational opportunities, and of course, visit TCNA booth at 3233. My name is Caitlin Simpson. I'm currently the Director of Laboratory Services at TCNA. I've been working in the lab for 15 years now. I also serve as the ASC A108 ANSI Committee Secretary, the Secretary for the U.S. Tag for ISO TC 189 Committee, also Secretary for the TCNA Handbook Committee. I serve on multiple ASTM committees, including C21, C18, F13, F15, there may be others in that, just leave in my mind. So also Clemson grad, so if you ever see us around and you are a Tiger fan, make sure you say something, because half our staff are all Clemson fans. I'll let Grant introduce himself.
Yeah, I'm Grant Davidson. I'm a standards development engineer currently at the Tau Council of North America. I've been there for 3 years, so not quite as long as Caitlin, but been loving it. Been there straight out of college, out of Clemson, so I've been also participating in a lot of those ASTM committees that Caitlin mentioned, and also working with the lab and doing research, looking at it for the most part from a slip resistance research perspective, and also a materials engineering perspective. So with that, let's get started.
Yeah, let's get going. So today we're talking about product performance testing, a behind-the-scenes look at how products are tested. Uh-oh. Lost our slides. This thing on?
There we go.
There we go. Let me get to the slide. So what we'll cover today, we'll discuss ceramic tile and glass testing, and what tests are available and what standards are used to confirm compliance with industry standards. Also discuss other installation materials testing and standards. We'll learn about some of the new and upcoming standards that will lead to testing of products in our industry. And also we'll learn how new products with antimicrobial properties has led to new testing in our laboratory. But first, I'll introduce you to our lab. So TCNA Laboratory is the largest independent tile, stone, and installation materials testing laboratory in North America. We're ISO 17025 accredited. Our headquarters are in Clemson, South Carolina, hence so many Clemson grads. We're right down the street in the Clemson Research Park. And we have a partnership with Clemson University, which you'll see later that really benefits our lab. Right now, we have our staff is combined over a century's experience at TCNA Lab. So we have employees in the lab, technicians in the lab that have been there for, many have been 15 to 20 years. So lots of experience working specifically in this industry. So we have 3 engineers, 1 PhD microbiologist, 1 PhD analytical chemist, and 6 technicians and support staff. And that's our staff right there. Oops, too far. So the testing we do is for product performance of various products: ceramic tile, glass tile, natural stone, installation materials like grout, mortars, underlayments, backer boards, really anything related to the tile industry. But we're also, in the last few years, have started getting into testing a much broader spectrum of materials, and I'll share that later as well. We have over 70 ASTM, ANSI, and ISO standards that we test to in our lab. And we also offer custom testing services, so when one of those standards doesn't fit the mold of what you're looking for, we can offer testing built for a specific product, or if there's a forensic issue or we need to help look through what happened in a failure, we can help with that as well. So who requests testing? Pretty much anyone. We do testing. One of the misconceptions is that our lab just does testing for manufacturers. But we test for anyone from the manufacturers down to the homeowners, anybody that's interested in checking that a product meets industry standards. We're happy to do testing for them. This thing is sensitive. There we go. So why is testing important? Why would any of these people want testing? Well, maybe it's obvious, but manufacturers and distributors can ensure that their products meet industry standards. Architects can specify and design tile installations that are appropriate for the intended application. Consultants can obtain the help they need to be able to solve an issue or figure out what happened in a failure. Installers can have accurate product details so that they can install using the correct standard and ultimately have a successful installation. And then homeowners can be confident that the product they paid for is what they received. So the product testing that we do is most of the testing we do is according to 3 major standards organizations. I mentioned all 3 when I introduced myself. So the ASTM standards, ANSI standards, and ISO standards. So a common question that we receive is which group of tests should I do? Should I do ISO? Should I do ANSI, ASTM? What do I do? The answer is it depends. Most of the ISO testing methods, especially for tile, are different or slightly different from what the ASTM methods are, so they're not created equal. But products that are sold in North America, typically you'll see that they're tested according to ANSI and ASTM standards, and then ISO standards are mostly used in the overseas market. So what are the product specifications? So for tile, in ANSI we have 3 major product specifications. A137.1 is the specification for ceramic tile. A137.2 is the specification for glass tile, and A137.3 is for gauged porcelain tile and porcelain tile panels and slabs. Now there's an ISO equivalent ISO specification for ceramic tile only. There is no glass tile and there is no gauge tile standard in ISO. So just to show you a few of the tests that we do that are included in the ANSI specifications for tile. In the upper left corner for you is dimensional testing. So one of the important questions we get is this tile warped beyond what the standard allows? I'm having problems with installing it without lippage. I don't think that it meets the ASTM standard, or the standard for warpage. So we can make measurements on this table that we include facial dimensions, wedging, which is the squareness of the tile, and edge and center warpage as well. In the center picture, that's breaking strength. So there's criteria based on the tile, the type of tile. So you have porcelain, wall tile, and just pressed floor tile. And they have different criteria for the strength. And then the other picture here is for water absorption testing. Many of you may already know, but one of the important tests in our industry is to determine whether a tile is porcelain or not. And the test that determines that is our water absorption test. So porcelain is less than 0.5% water absorption. Here we have in the upper left corner, there's the chemical resistance test. Then in the center is stain resistance. And then the last one here is bond strength. So we need to make sure that the tile can actually bond to the floor and it doesn't just, fall right off. Oh, geez. All right, so then there's product specifications for installation materials. Now, there's a whole lot on here, and I'm not gonna go into and read through all of these, but you can see there's 3 major categories: mortars and grouts, membranes, and backer boards. And there are different standards depending on the type of material that you're looking at. But one thing I will point out, in membranes, you'll see in ANSI we have waterproof membrane standard, crack isolation, and sound reduction membranes. In ISO, there's just 2 different sheet and liquid waterproof membrane standards. So there's not equivalence to the ANSI standard. Same thing with backer boards. You don't have that equivalent ISO standard. So the testing that we're doing is mostly in ANSI standards in our lab. So to show some of that testing, because there's a whole lot in there that I won't be able to get into, but for grout testing, there's tests like compressive strength, linear shrinkage and flexural strength, and tensile strength. So these are just the pictures of the samples that we create with the grout. So on the compressive strength, we just crush that cube, apply pressure until it breaks. For linear shrinkage, we're measuring how much change in the length of that bar, and then after that, we put it in a 3-point loading fixture and break that. And then the tensile strength, we have a grip that can pull that sample apart. Then there's thin set testing. In the ANSI standard, the most common test, or the test that kind of makes up most of the standard, are the shear strengths. So they include quarry to quarry shears, wall tile shears, and porcelain tile shears. So you can see in the sample picture, we have samples that are created where we have a specific thickness of mortar that is applied between the tiles. And we're using 2 tiles instead of bonding it to some kind of substrate because we want to control what we're testing. So we are just testing the thin set in this case. And so you just do face-to-face of the tiles, so you have a smooth surface, and that's not changing the result in any way. And then we put it in this fixture, apply load to that top tile until it shears apart. Man, this thing. All right, so tensile strength. So tensile strength is another bonding strength type test. In ISO, that is the main, in the ISO standards for mortar, that is the main measure of the bonding strength of the mortar. So you trowel mortar lines on a standard concrete block, apply the tile, and then we use this fixture to pull the tile off of the concrete. This test also is used in both ISO and ANSI for open time testing. So we trowel the lines, let it sit for a certain amount of time, then apply the tile and see how well it bonds after letting the tile sit, or the mortar sit for a while. So we could be here all day, so I'm not going to keep going with all these different tests because we have a lot more to cover. But how do we keep up with all this? That's a lot of different tests that we have to keep up with. Well, TCNA, as I mentioned when I was describing my bio and what I do at TCNA, is heavily involved in standards development. All of our engineers in our lab are constantly attending standards meetings and involved in the development of standards. Grant mentioned he does research that supports the development of standards. We participate in ANSI, ASTM, and ISO standards committees. Our staff hold leadership roles in all 3 standards development organizations. As I mentioned, we're the secretariat for that committee, for the ANSI committee. We're the chairman and secretariat for the ISO committee. And then we have people that participate in all these different ASTM committees, and that's probably not the full list of the different committees that we participate in. And we have one of our staff members on the ASTM board of directors. We also, of course, as I mentioned, are the secretary for the TCA Handbook Committee. Gosh. So standards are ever changing. New standards are always being developed as new products come into the market, as products are updated, and just as the market changes and things change. So it's important to be aware of the current and upcoming standards. So now I'm going to, this button is very sensitive. I'm going to turn it over to Grant to talk, so he can talk to you a little bit about some of the upcoming standards.
Thanks, Caitlin. Yeah, so like Caitlin mentioned, really there's a lot of moving parts, and despite how it may seem, the world of standards development is constantly changing. It's going very fast. There's always new things coming down the pipeline. And when you're looking at the marketplace, you'll find that a lot of what the development is geared towards is trends you're seeing in the marketplace. And we're going to talk about some codes and standards, and also go over some test methods that are really relevant today in the marketplace. So to start, we're going to talk about slip resistance. Slip resistance is always something that, it really is critical testing and information that really needs to be communicated, because ultimately what you'll find is when you have appropriate communication on slip resistance related information, you're going to have really good product specifications. And then ultimately, you'll find that a lot of these standards are now making their way into the code, which just further enhance those appropriate specifications being made. So the first code, which ANSI A326.3, the DCOF test method, was just adopted into, is the IATMO code. That's the Uniform Swimming Pool Spa and Hot Tub code. And some of you might be familiar with A326.3 already, but if you don't know, it specifies a wet DCOF number that's a dynamic coefficient of friction of 0.42. And then also in the IATMO code, there is a correction to that number that you get that is required for incline walkways. So sort of as the degree of the incline goes up, you're going to have an increased factor requirement for the DCOF there. And then there's also guidance that's provided on 3D patterned and profiled walkways, which we find sometimes might be a little bit more tricky to test. In addition to that, it is not in it yet, but recently at one of the ICC public hearings, A326.3 was, I guess you could say, preliminary acceptance into the IBC International Swimming Pool and Spa Code. So that will be coming up soon as well. So just to go into a little bit more detail about A326.3, like I mentioned, it specifies that 0.42 number, and that's going to be measured with a drag sled type tribometer. You can actually see it here on the cover of the standard. It's called the BOT 3000E. So essentially what that does is it drags a specific sensor material across the surface of the tile, and it's going to be looking at the vertical and horizontal forces acting upon it. And from that, you can get an idea of the frictional resistance of the tile or other hard surfaces. This is not just limited to tile. But what's going on with that standard now is currently in ballot, actually, with the ANSI A108 committee, is a new update to the specification section that will cover important information that's going to help essentially manufacturers more clearly communicate product use based on slip resistance characteristics. And you can see some of those categories that are coming soon. There are 5 of them, and they're all going to be based on either DCOF criteria or manufacturer declarations, which have been established by the product manufacturer. Like I've been mentioning, this is going to be really, really important from a communication perspective. Currently, there is no standard, to my knowledge, in existence that establishes this type of classification where manufacturers can essentially provide information that's ultimately going to benefit the end consumer in such a way because there will be more clarity on the slip resistance characteristics of their products. But DECOF is not the only slip resistance evaluation that we have. While we find that ANSI A326.3 is the test method most used in the United States, there are two other methods that we find a lot, and our lab actually conducts this testing sometimes as well, and they're used very frequently internationally, are the German ramp, which that's that big yellow thing that you can see. That's actually the one at TCNA's lab, and the British pendulum, which is next to it. And those are standardized. The German ramp, of course, it's the German Institute of Standardization, that's DIN. And then there are also European norms, technical specs that are available as well. And same goes for the pendulum, which also does have an ASTM test. And again, this isn't just limited to ceramic tile. This can be on all types of hard surface flooring. Moving on from slip resistance though, you all probably have seen that there's been it seems like a surge in the marketplace for a thick gauge tile or even thin gauge tile. But the thick tile, especially the 2cm tiles, are really becoming popular in the marketplace. And you'll see those used in different ways. Two of the really common ways are either just like loose lay for on-grade systems, or they're also used on pedestals. And currently, excuse me, there's new criteria that is being worked on for those specific types of tiles, the 2cms and greater. There already is the standard for the gauged porcelain tile and tile panel slabs. That's A137.3. And kind of what's coming up next for that is a specific table that is going to be based on some research that was conducted at TCNA, which is essentially going to provide certain performance criteria for these thicker 2cm gauge tiles. Because until now, porcelain pavers with thicker products, there has been no standard for it. So you can see a couple of the tests here that were actually ran at our lab. There's a drop bag test, which is pretty cool. It's a sandbag test, and you just drop it right on the tile. And essentially, failure is the tile breaking. So there's criteria in the upcoming standard for that. And other tests, you've got impact resistance, compressive strength, thickness variation, and so on. That's not it, though. There are a couple other product specifications, which are, these are a bit newer, but they're still under development. Just so you're aware, there's flowable hydraulic cement underlayments, the self-leveling underlayments, uncoupling, foam backer board, and then also field fabricated tiling kits in addition to that. And now I am going to hand it back to Caitlin.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Grant. So I mentioned earlier that there's sometimes that standards don't really fit into the mold of what we need to do in our lab. And this happens a lot when we have questions about, for example, a failure that occurs and there needs to be some sort of forensic analysis that takes place. So we have some other things that we do in our lab. Sometimes I think it's a little surprising that our lab does this because they're used to us doing just the routine tile testing, break-in tile, doing water absorption type testing. And we're seeing that the market's evolving, and you'll see that near the end with kind of our last few slides. So to start, we offer analytical chemistry testing. So we have an analytical chemist that has a lot of connections with Clemson University, which allow us to be able to do a whole host of different analyses on products and materials. So we can test the chemical composition for analysis of finished products or raw materials. We can detect phthalates or isophthalates in PVC in common plastic-based materials. We can also analyze to confirm manufacturer claims of phthalate-free and PVC-free, and we can detect trace metals and highly volatile organic compounds. So this might be really technical and a little bit beyond where we need to go here, but I'm just going to show you some of the equipment we have access to and what we can do with it. So we can use GCMS and FTIR. So GCMS is used for forensic substance identification, or FTIR is used to identify various compounds and materials. We have ICP-EMS for detection of various elements, including metals and nonmetals. Then we have high-performance liquid chromatography for detection of chlorides, bromides, and other anions and cations. So really in-depth chemistry work that we can do in our lab, or with our partnership with Clemson University. We also offer imaging and spectroscopy. This is through the Clemson Electron Microscope laboratory that's actually right in the same park that we're in, just down the street. And Grant is trained in running those SEM microscopes, so we can send him down there and get micron scale images of the surface. We've used this before, actually many times, when we get a client that comes to us and says, there is something on this tile that I don't think is supposed to be there. And so we will get a sample of the material, run it through the scanning electron microscope that has the EDS, which we can get the elemental analysis of what's on the surface of that material, compare it to a cleaned or a new piece, and a lot of times we're able to determine, yeah, there's something there, and it can be cleaned or it can't, or what's really going on to help solve that issue. We can also evaluate for aging or the harsh environmental conditions that are causing an issue in the surface of materials. So another service that people, I'm sure are knowing now because we're advertising a lot more now, but for over 10 years now, we've been offering antimicrobial testing in our laboratory. We have a PhD microbiologist out of Clemson also, and this year, maybe it's not surprising, we've seen a large influx in this type of work. And really what we've done is we've also added antiviral testing to that group of testing available to our clients. So some of the and this is where we're seeing the requests coming from well beyond the tile industry, just because of, we're in a pandemic. People want to have healthy, safe surfaces and for the public. So we're seeing all types of flooring materials or surface finishes, sanitary ware, textiles, plastic films, copper composites, transportation interiors, food prep areas, disinfectants and cleaning agents, so we can actually test the liquids that are in a disinfectant spray. So the testing we offer, and again, I'm not even going to read all these different bacteria and virus strains that we can test with, but it's really just to show you that we have this broad spectrum that we can test to in our lab. And with our antiviral testing, a lot of the work we're seeing is with those SARS-CoV-2 or the human coronavirus virus strains that we can work with. Now, our lab doesn't work with this actual virus, so we're a biosafety level 2 laboratory, but really only medical testing labs are the ones working with the actual virus. We have what's called a surrogate strain that we can work with. So that's really what a lot of these product manufacturers that have these new antimicrobial surfaces that they're applying are testing with, just to be able to say, hey, this surface is going to kill a virus strain as it touches the surface. Oops. Gosh. Okay, so we keep tying in standards because it's a lot of what we do at Tile Council also. What's really great is as we get some of these requests in and we see the trend and where things are going with our requests, we can then say, hey, we need to get a standard. We need to standardize how these things are tested when there's not something already out there. So in the case of microbiology, we've already started doing that. There was just finished an ISO standard that our microbiologist kind of led the effort on for microbiological testing of ceramic tile surfaces, because these products have actually been around for a long time, but they're really just picking up in popularity. So there are now going to be ISO standards that discuss the how to test specifically ceramic tile, because there are certain ways that you have to do that are different from other materials. Also, our microbiologist is involved in the ASTM committee that develops standards for all microbiology testing, and she's been asked to head up working on a standard for development of an antiviral testing standard, specifically to work with SARS-CoV-2 surrogates. So she's leading that effort as well. That brings us to the end. And as I mentioned, we're just barely scratching the surface of what we do in our lab, but and what testing is available and what is done in our industry, kind of behind the scenes with materials and standards development. But I hope that I've been able to kind of at least educate some on what we offer and what the standards the tile industry has. But we're also happy to answer any questions that you all have here in the room. Anybody have any questions? Wow, none? Come on, don't be shy. I know there's questions. Good, thank you.
So you talked about testing standards, and you had mentioned stuff with stains and various things that you test for. Obviously, if you're testing in the lab, it has to be uninstalled into the lab.
Yeah.
Is there any method of testing anything or checking that can be done on something that's actually installed product?
You mean checking for stain resistance of installed tile, or is it an issue where it's already stained? So typically what we recommend in that situation is first to send, if you have attic stock of the same material. I know it's just what you said, it's new pieces, but a lot of times when you've installed it, maybe there was something in the manufacturing process that changed from when they tested maybe a different lot or something in the lab. So we typically recommend that you send in a sample of the same lot to test first to these industry standards to see if they meet what standards were specified for that product. But also sometimes we can develop kind of customized staining tests, because maybe the stains we're using aren't doing what you're seeing in the field. There's also a chance that there's something else on the surface that's like holding the stain there that's not necessarily an issue with the tile, but there's just something that's gotten on there. So occasionally we have to ask, if we can't figure it out with a new piece, we have to ask to cut a piece out from the field. If it's really a bad issue that we just got to pull a piece, and we can start analyzing it with all those different chemical analysis of the stain, so we can figure out what is that's there, and is it something that's just on the tile that's holding it there, or is it the tile itself? Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, so we work a lot with stone, and one of the things that obviously our clients are concerned about is the staining. So we've actually been trying to test different sealers. Our tests are very elementary because we're using wine and salami to see how they can get. But if, like, for example, we wanted to test maybe like a marble, granite, quartzite with like a couple different sealers, how would that work in the lab?
We do that often, and I would not call your test elementary, because we actually do that. We often test with coffee, wine, red wine, mustard, ketchup. We really just put spots of all those things on the surface and let it sit there for a while. And then we'll try different cleaning agents that would be common. So that's a lot of what we do in the lab. So for sure, we have clients will send in, like you said, different samples. So you would want to test, if you're testing different sealers, you would want the same type of stone with each of the sealers, and then maybe a control piece that doesn't have a sealer. And then,
Not we've been testing like an unsealed piece,
Mhm.
a sealed piece, and then we'll do like we'll put the salami on it for like 2 days or something, and see, and then you have to leave it for a couple days because sometimes the same silk sand.
Yep.
Versus, but in terms of like the porosity, like could the different like machines that you mentioned, is there any way to kind of, at least maybe from the imaging, maybe to see what the porosity of the different stones are?
for sure, yeah, you can, and the imaging provides some feedback. Now, with that, it's hard to correlate directly, but if you're having an issue with a certain stone, we can, and then not having an issue with another, we can look at that and see what the surface porosity looks like. With stone, it is a little tricky because with natural materials, one piece might be very different from the next. It's not a, manufactured, we're doing the same process every time. So it's a little bit harder with stone, but for sure, yeah, you can use that to look at the surface porosity and see how that might, be an issue. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you.
The DCOF test, what type of medium is used on the surface to measure the resistance?
Are you referring to the slider material?
Yeah, the slide.
Yeah, so in the A326.3 standard, we use SBR rubber for the test foot. It's a specifically manufactured rubber. There are certain characteristics that you can actually refer to in the A326.3 standard, which is available for free on our website if you want to look at it, but it is that SBR rubber.
Do you use any type of a soap or anything?
Yeah, so what the test calls for, and of course you can modify it if you want to, but what the actual standard calls for, you can either test with no contaminant, just dry as is, in the lab or in the field. But then when you're doing wet testing, that's going to use a 0.05% SLS solution. That's the sodium lauryl sulfate. I think it's common in like shampoos and
Yeah, just
stuff
common
like that.
soapy
So
water.
it's a 0.05% solution in water.
It's
Yep.
slightly soapy water, yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Around how long, or how much time does it take from the time you, someone will ship like a piece of tile to you and then you get it returned to them with what it was stained with, or if it was like a manufacturer error?
Right, so your like turnaround time for testing. So it really depends on the test we're doing. Most of the tests that we perform, we can turn around in about 2 weeks with our regular turnaround, but we do offer expedited services. Depending on the test, sometimes, a test itself can take a week. And then there's like freeze thaw testing. If we're checking for resistance to freeze thaw, that takes like 12 to 14 weeks just to do the test because of how many cycles of freezing and thawing that we're having to put the samples through.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? We got a couple over here, it looks like.
When it comes to DCOM and how, in your experience in conducting those tests, how consistent are results over time? Obviously, when a new tile comes out, there's a DCOM test, and the manufacturer says it's this. Then over time, how consistent is that product normally? Is it?
I guess the answer really is it depends. It depends on how long the time period is. One of the topics that is getting a lot of attention in the slip resistance community internationally is what's called accelerated wear testing, because a lot of times what you'll see is over time, as a surface naturally is going to wear as people are walking on it, the DCOF does change. And depending on the product, you don't know if it's going to go up, if it's going to go down. So that's something that that testing has not really been formalized yet. I know there are a lot of ideas for it, but essentially that's what people will try to look at is sort of like accelerated wearing on it and then see what is going on with the surface. But it really just is a surface-to-surface kind of a thing there.
I
So.
think one of the key things about 326.3 is it has a section on field testing. So one of the important things that we should do is continually check a flooring material, because that can happen. You have a flooring that maybe starts out and it has this, it meets the requirement in A326.3, but over time, if it's especially with heavy traffic areas, it may drop. It may decrease in decoff, but that's why you need to continuously check it and have proper maintenance. And there are products out there that can help bring that value back up. So that's why it's so important to maintain that and to continually check that. So that's why one of the reasons why that field testing procedure was included in 326.3. So, okay.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Sorry.
And this may change the subject quite a bit. So instead of tile, of course, my business is primarily in slab and natural stone. And lately in the industry, certain materials, especially quartzites, a lot of our fabricators are having difficulty with absorption ratings, especially in white quartzites. So with the trend in countertops moving into these lighter quartzites and things that look like marble. So constantly I'm getting questions about absorption ratings on these materials. How do you suggest that, because we can't necessarily take responsibility, obviously, for like a natural stone.
Right.
And, I've been just sort of giving advice about pre-sealing and that we can't be responsible for color changes. Obviously, in an industry where the cutting techniques are primarily done underwater, is there a way that we can better prepare our customers, or should we be sending some materials out for testing?
Right.
Love some advice there.
For sure, I think it's good to have testing data available, but in this case, because with stone, while we do the testing and we work closely with the Natural Stone Institute, they may have some advice there. I don't really have much I can offer as far as how to help your prepare your customer, but I maybe contact NSI and see, because they have a lot of papers and technical assistance, documents that may touch on that. So that might be helpful for you. So.
Okay, on the decoff, you got a standard of .42. Is that a standard for interior, exterior? Or are you going to be changing it for exterior because the environments are different?
Yeah, so as of right now, the standard doesn't, in any of the normative language, address exterior. There's some informative language, which is not a requirement of the standard, but the .42 does not apply to that. It just applies to level interior spaces expected to be walked upon when wet.
Yeah.
The wet decoff of .42 applies to those.
When did the standard change? Because I know it was a different, it wasn't always 4.2. Did it change, 4 or 5 years ago?
The .42's been in the standard since 2012.
2012.
Yeah. Before that, there wasn't, the decoff wasn't part of the standard. It was ASTM-C 1028 was the test method that was used, but there was no value included anywhere in the standard. So that was developed and passed in 2012.
Okay.
So, yeah. Anybody else? I have cards if anybody wants to have my contact information. I'm always happy to answer additional questions that might come up, or if you have anything else now, happy to help. So thank you. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.